I'm Gabe Hernandez with Burns McDonnell. We're a full-service engineering firm delivering innovative design and EPC solutions to utilities, industry, and a range of power providers throughout the world. Burns McDonnell is proud to partner with FMEA in bringing you this encore presentation from the 2014 annual conference. Enjoy, and thank you.
Our next speaker is David Porter, who's the Director of U.S. Strategic Accounts at EPRI, the Electric Power Research Institute. David leads the staff of senior account executives dedicated to the strategic technology needs of major electric industry clients. He has more than 25 years of sales, marketing, and executive leadership experience across a variety of utility operations, including power marketing, transmission and distribution, and energy efficiency. Prior to his current role at EPRI, David held a variety of executive and management positions at Advantage IQ, Florida Power Corporation, and Duke Power, which I think are the same thing now, as well as in telecommunications and management consulting.
Thanks for the introduction, Bud, and thank you for the opportunity to be here today. As Bud mentioned, I started my career with Duke a number of years ago, and then after a few other transitions, I wound up at Florida Power Corp, left there to go pursue some other opportunities, and I guess if I'd stayed there, I could have gone full circle and been back at Duke again, which would have been fine since I'm back in Charlotte physically now. So if you wait long enough, things will change and you kind of come back to where you started. I do want to get started on this, a lot to discuss around the change in our industry. And Carl gave me a great lead-in for some of the things that we want to talk about. There's a lot of overlap from some of the things that Carl discussed relative to finance and financial support for the industry versus the things that we're seeing in change around the country. So as Carl noted, there's a tremendous amount of change in the last 10, 15 years, far more than we saw in the last 100 years of this industry. He mentioned shale gas. That's a huge game changer. You know, the question as he just posed it is, how long will, you know, $2, $3, $4 gas last? In the mid to late 90s, we all recall that gas was very cheap then. There was a huge rush to put combined cycle gas turbines in place. And then I can remember sitting with clients as little as 6 years ago, almost exactly 6 years to the date, when gas was $13 a million BTU versus that $2. Now, shale gas is a real game changer compared to that. Will we ever see $13 gas again? Who knows? But if you listen to the industry analysts and they'll tell you that the quickest way to get to $8 a million gas is to count on $4 or $5 gas in your long-term planning. And that's a pretty safe bet, I think. A couple other things up here. The variable generation, be it whatever type of renewable it is, but particularly wind and solar, have caused tremendous changes on our system. I'm going to talk about that a lot over the next few minutes and how we need to make changes to the grid and on either end of the grid to make these things work effectively for us as an industry. The demand for electricity, Carl talked about this. At best, on the whole, across the country, we're seeing flat growth and energy consumption as a collective industry. It's been tough. Energy efficiency's taken care of a lot of this. The lack of new building, both in residential and commercial space, also has a huge effect on that. And that's an area that we really need to take an opportunity to grow as an industry. And towards the end of this, I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about beneficial electrification, how that helps the industry and how that helps your bottom line together. Other things that we've seen, customer connectivity, customer expectations have changed tremendously. The advent of all the handheld devices that we have and how those are used make a big difference in how our customers are connected and what their expectations are from us as service providers. Cybersecurity, there's hardly a day that goes by that you don't see something in the news media about a cybersecurity attack somewhere on a utility in this country. If you look at the information from the government agencies, the most targeted group of companies in the country for cyber attack is the U.S. utility industry. So if you haven't seen something yet, be prepared, because it is out there. We haven't seen too much that's been done in the way of harmful attacks yet. We've seen a few things on physical security that have been really bad, particularly in Silicon Valley. How many of you are familiar with what happened to PG&E a few months ago? Yeah, very, very serious situation there. They were within something close to about 25 or 30 megawatts of having a complete blackout in Silicon Valley due to someone taking a high-powered rifle and shooting up a bunch of equipment in a 200 kV substation. And then other major events, you know, being part of the state of Florida, you folks are very used to dealing with major storms, particularly hurricanes. That's not true around the rest of the country. You get a superstorm Sandy that comes into an area like New Jersey and New York. You folks know how to deal with that. They don't. And that causes a whole lot of problems to their system and with their clients. And then lastly, something else that Carl talked about was energy and environmental policy. And there is certainly probably the greatest specter of uncertainty around that than there is anything else. Between 316B rules that have just come out from EPA, 111D, the Clean Air Act, how that's going to be enforced around the states, the standards that they've set, it's a very difficult measure to understand and to react to. So the uncertainty is still going to continue to be probably a major driver for what we do as a business. So as we look at this and think about change, I've picked Germany here as an example. We could have picked Italy or Spain, but could this be the future that we're looking at as an industry? You see here that Germany has over 60 gigawatts of connected renewable energy in the form of photovoltaics and wind. They only have a peak demand load of 80 gigawatts. So 75% of their peak theoretically could be met with renewable load. But the other three things here that you need to keep in mind and look at, reliability is a huge issue here. And the system operator in Germany is very concerned about how this works. When you have that much load that's that much generation that's intermittent, if there is some type of system failure, and for example, the wind goes offline or you have a frequency disturbance that causes all the PV to come offline, you're going to see a huge swing in generation that's available to the system, and they don't have the backup inertial capabilities they've shut down their nuclear, they don't have as much fossil running. When you're that dependent on intermittent generation, it's very difficult to handle a big swing or a big change. So potential for a big blackout there looms. Energy affordability is a huge issue in Germany. This is a policy-driven initiative in Germany. They wanted to have clean energy, so they put in a feed-in tariff that started with a 55-cent per kilowatt hour credit for people who put in particularly PV. That declines over time, but what that has done, because that feed-in tariff has to be reimbursed on the backs of all the clients, almost all the clients in Germany, the industrial customers don't pay the surcharge for the feed-in tariff. Only the residential and commercial customers do. So in Germany, the typical residential kilowatt hour now is 40 cents. That makes living in California or New York look pretty good. And you'll hear a lot of people say, well, you know, the average electric bill in Germany is the same as it is in the US, about $100. That's true when you look at the overall dollars. The big difference is that in Germany, the amount of energy consumption in a typical home is about 25 to 30% of what it is in the US. So those aren't apples to apples. You have to look at it on a pure kilowatt hour cost basis. The third thing, and it's most important when you look at this, and you think about this being a policy initiative to drive clean energy. In 2013, Germany as a country had a higher carbon intensity footprint than the United States. Think about that. That's an amazing statistic. Look back over there at 75% of their peak demand is available in intermittent load. But what are they doing when that is not online? They're burning a lot of lignite. They're taking a lot of lignite out of the ground. They don't have the same environmental controls requirements that we do here in the US, so their overall carbon intensity was higher than ours. So this is another one of those examples where, you know, unintended consequences come out of policy at times. They get some results that they want, but there's some unintended results that come along from that as well. The other thing that I think is really important to note, I mentioned this earlier, the consumers in this country have changed drastically. And what they do has changed drastically, and how that affects our business is really important. Carl mentioned the plasma TV. A few years ago, everyone was doing plasma TVs. They're a 500-600 watt load that you plug in your house. The swing a few years later, 5 to 8 years later, we're on to LEDs. As Carl mentioned, they weigh a whole lot less, they're easier to move. They also use a lot less energy. They're about 50 watts. So, you know, there's a kind of a shift there in your residential load, and you'll continue to see those kind of things. Handheld devices and connectivity. You see here a couple of examples where some utilities are using handheld devices for their clients to report outages, down power lines, those kind of things. They're very useful for those things. Many of you, anybody have a Nest thermostat? Yeah, okay. How many of you play with it all the time on your phone? There we go. Yeah, Nest thermostat, Google just recently bought them for a few billion. You can control your thermostat and other loads in your house from your smartphone all the time. Great stuff, but that's a level of sophistication our clients haven't had in the past. Here's an example I put up here from the state of Texas. TXU Retail. They came up with, and I know anybody remembers the old days of the breakup of Ma Bell, weekends and nights free. They now have that for people who buy energy from them. And part of what they were doing there was trying to drive greater interest in the use of electric transportation and have folks use the off-peak hours to charge those vehicles. One other key thing that we're doing a lot of work on, and you'll see coming even further, is microgeneration, particularly on the residential level. Those low gas prices open up the opportunities for some technologies that have been out there for a while but have never really been able to make it, like some of the Stirling engines for combined heat and power applications at a residence. That low long-term gas price makes some of those things more palatable and more economically feasible. But as you think about residential clients in particular, which is a huge part of your economy here in Florida, you know, over the last few years, we haven't seen a lot of growth there, except maybe in some of these miscellaneous loads, the plug-ins, because energy efficiency has taken a large bite out of what we would normally have seen as growth. The new appliances, be they refrigerators, cooking equipment, or HVAC, have gotten a lot more efficient over the years, and they will continue to do so, which erodes kilowatt-hour sales. So that's something we need to keep in mind. The other thing, we'll talk about this a little bit more later as well, is that as an industry, we have traditionally had a bit of a blind spot when it comes to consumer behaviors and how we treat that and how we proactively use that to our advantage. So I want to spend a little time on that as we go forward. So as we sit today, and I've got this little picture of a power system here with a red line through the middle of it, kind of right through the transmission line. As we think about the system as more distributed energy resources come in on the right side of that graph, be it rooftop solar or a gas-fired Stirling engine of some type, what happens on that right-hand side has a severe impact on the central generation resources and the transmission system as well. So we've got to find that balance, and right now we have some divergent trends going on here. And I'll spend a couple minutes here talking about solar and how that fits into it. If you look at the growth of PV in this country, it took 20 years to go from 0 to 1 gigawatt of PV capacity in the US. Anybody have any idea how long it took to double that capacity after we reached that? 12 months, 1 year. And we can continue to see those kind of growth rates. So that's going to have a huge impact. Why does that have an impact? Here's an example. If you are a residential customer and you put in some rooftop PV, this is what an example of an interconnected but not integrated looks like. And I've used an example here. You see the startup power curve for an HVAC unit on the home. And you can see from the load curve that at startup, there's a tremendous amount of capacity that's needed to provide the startup for that HVAC system. You'll also see the green line right here, which is the steady state energy provided from the PV array on this rooftop. So what happens is that the customer needs the grid support in order to start that unit. The PV cannot provide that. So you as a utility are providing that, acting like a battery, whatever you want to call it, but you're providing the startup through the grid, and then once it reaches steady state, that PV array has the ability to provide all the energy required to run the HVAC system. So what's wrong with this picture? A couple of things. One is you're providing capacity that you're not being reimbursed for, and that's the number one thing. If you look at the traditional rates in our industry, we have recovered from primarily residential customers, we've recovered a capacity portion that's required to serve them through a kilowatt hour charge. What happens in this situation, you're still having to supply that capacity, but you're not getting the return because they're not buying the energy from you. They're not buying the volume of energy for you to be compensated for that capacity you're providing. So in this situation, the client's getting the best of both worlds. They have the advantage of owning the PV and getting the benefit of the bulk of their kilowatt hours being provided by that, and they're using the grid as the backup. So as Carl talked about, one of the things that happens here as you get into, you'll hear some things around the industry about the death spiral. And you have more and more people go to PV, and you have less and less customer base to spread the cost over, and it's sort of a self-perpetuating cycle that you have to be very careful of. So that has to fit into what we're doing from a planning perspective. I wanted to put this example up here because this shows you what happens when a whole lot of PV winds up on rooftops in your system. This is actual data from Enel, the big utility in Italy. And they're actually a big worldwide utility, but this is data from their operations in Italy. These are 3 system load curves over 3 consecutive years. The blue curve you see there is from August of 2010. The yellow curve is from 2011, and then the red curve is from 2012. This is actually system data. And this shows the growth and penetration of PV. And you can see in this area, this is where the sun comes up. Here's the PV curve, the sun shining curve, so you can see where PV is at its max right here in this belly. This is the proverbial duck curve. But several things happen from this. And this, like I said, this is actual data. You know, one is with this change and so much PV on the system, now you've got greater ramp rates that you have to cover. Greater ramp down. You have a need to be able to operate at lower minimum generation levels in order to meet needs so you don't get into an over-generation, over-voltage situation. And then you have to be able to ramp upward more quickly as well once the sun goes down. The big thing that I think is most important for you as you think about it, you know, not only the operational issues, but when you look right here in the middle of the belly of the duck, there's a whole lot of lost energy sales and a whole lot of revenue in that bucket. So that's something we have to be really cognizant of too, is how do we make this work in a way that is maximizing the value of the system for everybody. So a lot of the work that we're doing at EPRI and in conjunction with our members is on an integrated grid concept where we maximize the capabilities on both ends between central generation and distributed resources to maximize the value for everybody. And that has to do with being able to provide reliable, environmentally responsible, and affordable energy to all of our clients. So how do we get there? The first place is to have a grid modernization. And grid modernization can be anything as simple as reconductoring to meet some needs related to distributed resources. It may be adding new sensors, new smart grid controls, new communications, a demand management system, wide variety of things that can be done there on the grid modernization piece. Communication standards and interconnection rules. This is a big area where there's a lot of work going on. We have to have a common communications protocol with all the devices that are being added to the system, plus what's being added at the customer premise. If we don't have a common communications protocol, it's going to be very difficult to have devices interact with each other. Are any of you familiar with the IEEE 1547 standard? That is a standard that relates to inverters and their use on PV. The current standard is that if an inverter, you can't use the smart inverter capabilities that are inherent in those that are being provided with solar arrays today. Because the code today requires that if there is a frequency or voltage fluctuation within a certain window, pretty tight window, then the inverter has to disconnect from the system. And which is, not using that device to its full capability. That smart inverter has the ability to use the PV array to help prop up voltage, provide volt var support, frequency support, but it's not allowed to do it right now. So IEEE is working to get the new 1547 out, hopefully by the end of this year. And then at that point, individual states will have to approve it. But that'll make a huge difference in how you can maximize the use of distributed resources, particularly solar. Integrated planning and operations. When you put all of this distributed energy resource capability and hanging on the end of the distribution system, now your distribution system needs to look like and act like more like a transmission system than what it does today. And so you need to have a set of rules of engagement that allow the distribution system and the transmission system to work together and maximize those resources. And the last piece is informed policy and regulation. As I mentioned before, market structures and rate structures will need to be changed with the greater advent of distributed resources. One of the things that we're working on in our integrated grid concept, at the end I'll give you a link where you can go and get a couple of papers that we have out there on the integrated grid right now and tell you about some of the work that we're doing. The key thing is we're working through a benefit cost analysis methodology for evaluating distributed resources. The key thing as we see it is that we get the system engineering right, because without that you can't truly assess the benefit cost ratio. You have to know what the system impacts are from anything that you put on it. And so the system engineering becomes paramount to that, so you know what truly is going to impact the system once it's hung off the end. So as we face this change and this transformation for the industry, how do we become effective in dealing with that as a utility industry? And one of the ways is to think about how we can drive change. Three key pieces of that that you see today. One is clean energy, one is energy efficiency, and another is beneficial electrification. For all of those things that we might think about doing with our clients, it all starts from a common ground. And that is understanding our customers. I mentioned earlier that as an industry we may not have done the greatest job of understanding our clients in a way that we should, that would help us better sell to them. But now that becomes even more paramount. So one of the things is to know your customers even better than you think you do today. Do that through customer segmentation. Far beyond what class of customer are they in, but understanding them, particularly again in the residential community. Who are the early adopters? Who are going to take on anything new that you put out there? Who are the ones that are going to be the last adopters of anything new? The last people to get the LED TV or the last people to get a smartphone? All the way to that extreme. Know who those are, know where they are in between, how you target them with opportunities, and offer them choices in their electric service plans. Give them some options based on their buying habits and buying capabilities. And then also provide technology options. Tremendous opportunity there, but the key thing is that we need to understand how our clients behave, how they buy, and be able to predict what their behavior patterns are going to be. On electric service plans, you can look all over the country and see a variety of different things there, but there's a multitude of components here, but three key ones. One, time differentiated pricing. Many of you have time of use rates. How many of you have time of use rates in place today? Okay, anybody have real-time pricing at this point? Nobody really doing that. We're seeing more across the country with real-time pricing, but it's still a little bit, particularly when you think about the number of residential customers, that's still something that most of us just really don't care to deal with on a daily basis, and neither do our clients. But there's a lot of options from a time differentiated pricing standpoint. You know, there's a lot of capability with controls technology. How many of you have smart meter capabilities today that have the ability to communicate on the customer side of the business? On their side, that's great. Lots of opportunity there as well. The other thing to watch out for is we got a lot of ways to bypass the meter, whatever we got there. The Nest thermostat's a great example of that. And then lastly, feedback, information on how the clients use energy. There are people who want to know how they use energy, when they use energy, and what they do to conserve energy. So the trick here is to marry up what our business goals and objectives are with what the client needs are and put that in a package that they can use. Beneficial electrification is one of the ways to do that. Great opportunity for us. We define beneficial electrification in two ways. One, it improves a customer's operations or profitability, or two, it improves the environmental quality overall. And there are a lot of opportunities in beneficial electrification. You see a few here. Heat recovery heat pumps, where an industrial or commercial customer has a waste stream going out the door that you can recover some heat and reuse somewhere else. Process heating, tremendous opportunity there for direct fired gas uses, particularly in industrial customers. Switch over to infrared or ultraviolet curing, get rid of the volatile organic compounds, become more efficient for the client, drive a better bottom line for them, increase kilowatt hour sales. Ozonation, using ozone to treat wastewater streams and purify water is a great application, and it takes a tremendous amount of energy to generate ozone to do this. Membrane separation, whether it's ultrafiltration or reverse osmosis, also takes a lot of energy to drive waste streams through that and cleanse them. One of the great things that we've seen is electrification of off-road equipment. And I'll give you a quick example. We did some work with Southern Company and Georgia Power at the Savannah port, the Port of Savannah. They converted the entire port from diesel-driven equipment, the derrick cranes, you know, gas-driven forklifts, converted all that to electric. That was an increase in load for them of 220 megawatts. So there's a huge opportunity in situations like that. And as we all look around our service territories, particularly with industrial clients, there's a tremendous opportunity there. It's not just about electric cars. So some real good opportunities here. Another really easy one to think about is electrifying lawn equipment. One of the biggest offenders when it comes to VOCs and carbon monoxide is lawn equipment, what we use to mow our lawns or whack the weeds with. Those lovely two-cycle engines, a lot of them. If you look at what I circled here in red, if you were able to replace that equipment nationwide, and this is of course a theoretical number, but it would be the equivalent of getting 20 million cars off the road. That's a huge number. But there's just a great potential here for something just as simple as promoting the use of electric lawn equipment. When you think about the value of electrification, three key areas here, and you'll all be able to get these slides off from the website, right? So I won't spend a lot of time on this because I'm running out of time, but three key benefits here. You know, there's benefit for the customer. You're going to make them more efficient, make them more productive. There's a benefit to the utility. It helps you shape load. It helps you fill in valleys where you may need to do that and sell additional energy. It's also a great economic development tool, particularly when you're looking to attract new customers in or keep customers within your service territory. And lastly, there's societal benefits that we get from the environmental aspects and reducing the overall greenhouse gas emissions. So where do we go from here? One of the key things I want to mention here is the market developments and the external influence there. If you look around the country, and I'm sure you're seeing this in your state, there are a lot of other folks out there today offering energy efficiency capabilities, demand response capabilities. There's a lot of demand response aggregators around the country. Don't know that that's really hit much here in Florida yet, but there's a lot of them out there. And then even client-sided energy resource systems. The key thing to look for in the future is how much third-party entry are you going to have? You know, how much can we prevent people from getting between us and the customer? And it's really important to think about that. I'll give you an example of something that happened in the state of New York, which had a pretty profound effect on one of the utilities in upstate New York. There was a combined heat and power project that was put in. And it wasn't put in just for a single site customer. It serves a university, it serves a hospital, and it serves a nursing home. They are not on a contiguous piece of property. They're located down the street from each other. So the commission in New York approved that as a qualifying facility. Took all that load off the system and allowed them to move energy, both electric and thermal, around between these different entities not connected as clients. And that had a significant impact. If that type of impact continues, that can have a severe effect on all of our systems, you know, behind the transmission system. So it's something to keep a close eye on and really keep in mind as you do your planning. One other thing that came out just in the last couple of weeks was a study that was sanctioned by the governor in the state of Maryland on microgrids and looking at the capabilities of microgrids and how those can best be deployed in the state. The result from that study was that the recommendation was that they do not allow third-party ownership of microgrids, that is the purview of the utility. And it needs to be that way for service reliability first and foremost. There's also some legal ramifications to that because of the way they're set up for what is a monopoly territory and what is a service territory. So that applies all across the country, and it'll be interesting to see how others play out. But New York took an exception to that, and it made a big difference there. So some of our challenges for the future: better coordination is huge, particularly as we see more distributed energy resources. Better coordination between generators and gas pipelines, not so much of an issue here. Get to other parts of the country, particularly in the Northeast, that's a huge issue. But we're going to have some operational challenges. I think one of our bigger challenges is going to be with our clients. Our clients have greater expectations every day. They want more information, they want more reliability, and they want it cheaper. So the challenge for us is to continue to be able to meet all of the client needs while keeping our businesses healthy from a financial standpoint. So kind of in summary, what does it all mean? I think there's 4 key takeaways. Business model and strategy are paramount to what we do as an industry. And first and foremost for you and for any other utility in the country is stay close with your clients. Know what they need, meet their needs, give them what they need. It's critical. Stay abreast of innovation. You don't have to be the leader in innovation, but watch it closely and apply it where you can to make a difference in your business. Third thing, remain flexible and agile. Change is going to continue to come. Going all the way back to my first slide, change is just, it's constant. We deal with it every day, and that uncertainty that comes with it. External forces are going to continue to be important, and even when you look at something like the 111D piece of the Clean Air Act, we still don't know how that's all going to play out. And that can drastically change the direction that you think you're going one day to the next. And then lastly, you know, I would just remind you, as public power entities, you hold a unique position. You are in a great position in my mind. You're community leaders, and you also have an existing and very trusted relationship with your clients. I would encourage you to leverage that every opportunity that you can and stay focused on what your clients need and how you can give it to them in a way that works for both of you. So with that, I'm going to close. And you see this link here. You can go to our website, EPRI.com, download the integrated grid concept paper. You'll also see a second paper that's on there that gives you an update on where we are with our benefit cost methodology analysis, which we will have completed next month, the draft completed of that. We will put it out for public comment for a period of a few months. So stay abreast of that. Look at our website. We would appreciate feedback that you can provide to us on that methodology. And then the third phase that we'll be getting into is actually a lot of field demonstration. Everything from microgrids to distribution management systems to planned deployment of solar versus unplanned. We're going to do a lot of work all across the country with some actual installations, measurement and verification, so we can validate our methodology and look at the real impacts. So would appreciate your feedback on the methodology when that's out next month. And then if you're interested in participating in some of those demos, whether it's hosting or being a part of one, just let me know, and my contact information is on there.